more resolute now than ever about the fight for liberation being essential and non-negotiable. In the words of Ella's song, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." So that is my location, is that I believe in freedom. Even in the space of oppression, I believe in freedom. Even when it seems like freedom is the last thing to happen right now, I really do believe in freedom. I believe in our liberation. I believe that we have not come this far just to come this far. Hopeful is the word I was going to use, but it's not hope as much as it is resolution. I refuse to die here, and I refuse to see what we have fought for and how far we've come. We've come this far by faith. And I really do believe that we didn't come this far just to come this far. And so in the wake of everything that is happening and going to happen and still coming and still reeling from and still trying to understand, I do believe in freedom. So I do not rest. That's where I stand, is that I just believe that we are in a space of all the shit we've been talking about. We've been talking about revolution. We've been talking about how the way the system works doesn't work. We can't dismantle master's house with master's tools. We've been saying that all this time, and yet here we are 3 months after election still mad about the fact that trying to use master's tool of voting did not dismantle master's house. And it's not even necessarily that voting is master's tool. Let me rephrase that. We try to use the U.S. electoral system, which is designed in a way to be unfair. It is built on a disparity, and it's built that way so that it can maintain and centralize power to few hands. In that way, it makes sense that Master's House Master's House was not dismantled by Master's tool, which is, the U.S. electoral process, not with the Electoral College, right? So all this time we've been spending saying that, we can't use these tools to get out of this condition. I think we are now presented with, put up or shut up, right? I think we're now presented with that space of, you said you wanted a revolution. You said you wanted a different world. You said you wanted to be free. You said, God, you said in this religious text that Jesus comes that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And you understand abundance cannot happen in bondage, right? And so now we're at a time where we have to choose new and different ways. The system did not work in dismantling itself. It doesn't have a self-destruct button, right? It has weaknesses and it has loopholes, but it does not self-destruct. And so participating in ways, expecting it to self-destruct or to yield its power back to the hands of the people is just, it's not realistic, right? And so I am very much in a space of understanding it's time for us to get free and to stay free and to move and operate in such a way that we're building outside of these ideas of what we think the system is or should be or could be if we could just reform it. There is no reformation. There is only revolution. And I believe that is the message and the lesson of, or one of them, I'm not going to say it's the only one, but it's definitely one of the messages and lessons of this experience. Okay, we tried everything now. We tried everything we could to reform the system. I hear us speak often about Kamala Harris as we understand she would have been head of the empire. And we understand that voting for her was an act of harm reduction, not deliverance. And yet, there is still just this deep frustration of the expectation that it shouldn't get this bad, right? We keep expecting these people to just yield their power and to maybe realize that they are hurting themselves in the same way. Instead of understanding it like these people are happily willing to sacrifice themselves that way. They're happy to give away their power if it means maintaining a status. They'd rather die a hero than live in peace. And the heroism is in saving and preserving and conserving power. The heroism is in denying the humanity and the dignity of all people who do not fit into the very narrow ideas of what it means to be human. And so we're at a time where there is There is not a politician in this system. And there are some that I think are on fire. Jasmine Crockett is doing work in the traditional lineage of black women that have come before her. As we all know, a Barbara Jordan, a Shirley Chisholm, a voice of light in darkness. And yet, that system just still ain't gonna save us. So how do we dream ourselves free? How do we dream of a world where we do more than survive the system? How do we dream ourselves free? And I think the only way we can dream ourselves free is when we accept that we have done all that we can do. We talk about it all the time in church. After having done all you can, just simply stand, right? And I don't know if it's to stand and just wait on God. That's, of course, how I always interpreted it coming up. But now I wonder if it's like, stand up because you're weak in the knees. You'll be getting weak in the knees, stand up. Like, no, I wonder if it's really like after you have kneeled and you have bowed and you have pled and you have begged and you have done everything. You have tried to educate. You have tried to love them out of their hatred. You have tried to educate and teach them out of their hatred. You have tried to tolerate them out of their hatred. You have tried to submit and surrender out of their hatred, and they kept it anyway. After having done all you can, simply stand up, and no longer putting ourselves in a position to beg for recognition, to beg to be seen, to beg to be viewed as human, to beg for what is already entitled to us as God's creation, to demand that these people see the reflection of God within us and honor it as such. That would have to mean that these people actually have a reverence for the holiness of God. And everything they have done by their actions has shown us that they do not. There are two types of people. There are those who are seeking to be the reflection of God, and there are those who are seeking to be God. When you begin to understand things in that context, you understand that these are people who are jealous of God. Every accusation is a confession. What's the one thing you grew up hearing if you grew up in the church? God is a jealous God. Thou shalt have no other God before me. God was killing people off for not believing in the way that he showed that he was Lord, that he was God. How many times I am the Lord your God comes up in the Old Testament, right? Every accusation is a confession when we understand that the biblical text as it is an amalgamation of interpretation, addition, and revision, with no source materials available to us as the public to truly make sure that was the intended message of the word. Every accusation is a confession. When you accuse God of being jealous, it's usually a confession that you are jealous of God. And the jealousy is people's willingness to surrender to the mystery of God, to trust God with the whole self. These people who are trying to be God want that. They want you to just love them and give your whole self to them simply because they exist and you choose to do so. The only time you seem to have a choice in Christianity is when you become a Christian. Everything else about the religion is following it to the letter of a scriptural text. So that's why people get sold. The text is infallible and inerrant. How arrogant it is to believe that a 2,000-year-old text can contain every single thing to be known about a God who created an earth and a universe that has existed for 4.5 billion years in a society that has only had recorded history for the last 5,500. And you think that this cobbled together text is the extent of all we will know, should know, and ever know or think about God in a 2,000-year-old religion that is a blip in the radar of time as we know it and understand it. I'm taking it by faith that it's 4.5 million years old, but I have belief in God enough that I actually can understand the world is billions of years old, and that doesn't make God any less real. So you have a people who are vested in you having faith in God as a God of suffering, in God who requires your suffering for salvation. People who, when you say that your existence as a black woman, your blackness, your Africanity, what you come from, predates Jesus and predates Christianity, that their instinctual response as fellow black people is not to feel a sense of pride and resilience a sense of God has always been within me and around me and reflected by me. Before this book thought it could tell me the limits of who God could be to and for me, I existed. My people existed. Those that would come to create me existed for billions of years. They don't hear that. They hear an attack on their very, very, very small God. And that's by design. I put it to you this way. White people have been meddling, or whiteness, supremacy, is been meddling with the minds, spirits, and deep ancestral connection of Black people for a long time. My sister Valerie said tonight on her podcast, I'm walking the boulevard, but stick with me. She said on her podcast tonight that it takes longer to clean up after the storm. The worst of the storm is usually the residual of what's left. The storm will pass. And if the storm is gone, you are still doing the work and cleanup efforts of it. So if you're talking about 500 years of storm, there have not been enough lifetimes out of the storm to even begin the cleanup. Because every time we begin cleanup, there's another storm. When we get emancipated from slavery, we go into black codes and Jim Crow laws and get emancipated from that. And then we go into the crack era and we go into new imprisonment or new slavery, which is just, the prison industrial complex, right? And then we come out of that and we start going to school and now we're in debt, right? So now we're wage slaves, right? We can't pursue our dreams because we're constantly pursuing money, because we're constantly pursuing the dollar, because we're constantly pursuing our security. Every time we come out of a storm, and we begin cleanup, another storm comes. Been meddling for a long time. There's always a disruption of our reclamation of self and our return to self of who we were before the meddlesomeness of supremacist psychopathy, right? Or sociopath. And so when you are aware of that, you should begin to question just how deep the supremacy runs in your salvation. You should interrogate just how deep supremacy runs in your salvation. Those of us raised in the church tradition like me were taught that the dead, your ancestors, sage and just any kind of thing could be remotely root work and witchcraft. That's a sin. You're going straight to hell. Straight to hell. We were terrified of that. Of connecting with the self. And who told us that? The Bible. The Bible that we couldn't read because literacy was a crime. The Bible that we had to learn the interpretation thereof of the same man responsible for our enslavement who taught us the Bible. The same man responsible for our enslavement taught us the way to salvation. Salvation is freedom. It's rescue. To be saved is to be saved from damnation. And it means to be held back from damnation. So for any enslaved person in their mind, salvation has to equal freedom. That's why Black people didn't start to engage in the practice of Christianity until they could infuse their own religious tradition within it. That's why we have so many remaining Africanisms within Black Protestant churches. Y'all understand what I'm saying? You were taught by your slave master what salvation was. So you have to check the supremacy in your salvation. There's always residue of our baptism within white supremacy. And these people have a vested interest in our continued disruption. And so they teach you that connecting with your ancestors is a sin. And that will keep you from salvation. Sin will keep you from salvation. If you sin, your salvation is automatically gone, right? It's so fragile. It's so fragile. It's so hard to hold on to. These same people who sold your mama and your newborn baby and your children and your siblings and your aunt and your favorite cousin, you feared New Year's because you knew some of your family was going to leave. These people who thrived on the destruction of your family members and of your family unit by sending them to other places and you never seeing them again. Never. You don't know what becomes of them. They just gone. And you can spend the rest of your life wondering what happened and loving them and grieving someone who is still alive. And they grieving you too. And ain't no way for y'all to get back to each other. Those people taught you salvation. And they told you connection with your family was an ancestor. Was a sin. So why would they not teach you that ancestral veneration is a sin? Their goal is to disrupt your family bloodline, baby, in life and in death. You not connecting with your ancestors is a disruption of your bloodline. And then we talk about we're forgetting the recipes. We're forgetting ourselves. Because we constantly keep participating in a salvation that says you need to be separated from your family. We used to say shit in church like, if my friend won't go, I'll go. If my mama won't go, I'll go. If my daddy won't go, Lord, I'll go. Wait a minute. The people who live, breathe, and protect me, the love it takes, the unselfishness it takes to keep something besides yourself living. Everybody that have a baby ain't a parent. We know that. So those who are good parents, if my mama won't go, why? Why ain't my mama going? What she know that I don't? If my daddy won't go, why? What do my mama and daddy see that I don't see? And why am I so willing to run without my protectors? And why would God want that for me? But your person who taught you your salvation was also responsible for your bondage. That don't make religion or Christianity white man's religion. It means exactly what I say. You got to check the level of supremacy that's in your salvation. We focus so much when we talk about disrupting the system that was built on the backs of our subjugation and dehumanization. The basis of all evil in this current iteration of the world is its willingness to normalize and engage anti-blackness. Racism is not normalized, it's normal. There's a difference. Normalized implies that it was never okay at some point in the society, in the community, as a social agreement. It wasn't okay at some point. And then at some point we revised the agreement and said, you know what? This is all right. This is okay. This is normal. It's okay to live this way. That was not the case for racism. From the outset, racism was normal. It was never criticized at that point as something that was possibly wrong. It was normal. Racism says to us, black people are like, hey, you know what? I believe I'm experiencing this really horrible thing because of the color of my skin. And the fact that racism is normal. Normal racism responds and says, of course you are. That's the agreement. That is the conditions and terms and conditions, of your blackness. That's the point. Of course you are. It's not normalized, it's normal. And these are the people that we expect to find the ability to reason with and to say, like, give us free. All you gotta do is not try to have everything and to respect the autonomy and humanity of other people. But now you have folks who will say, I didn't own any slaves. Nobody alive was a slave. That's their favorite gaslighting phrase. But here's the reality. At worst, the people who exist now are descendants of those who enslaved us. And at best, they are descendants of people who saw no qualms with the dehumanization of our black bodies, of the black bodies of our ancestors. Because you either enslaved people or you condoned it. You don't get white abolitionists until damn near the end of enslavement. So for hundreds and hundreds of generations of people before, at best, the people who exist now who never owned a slave, they are simply people who were complicit in the enslavement of black people. That's who they are the descendants of. And so either way, whether they are at the top of the food chain of profit or are they the lowest and the poorest, they still have a vested interest in the maintenance of anti-blackness. And they behave in such a way. And there is nothing about their systems and structures that can be reformed to get them off of it. Because blackness is a necessary counterweight to whiteness. The oppression of black people is the point. The oppression of indigenous people is the point. And even though the oppression ends up being hierarchical, it's still oppression. Just because I'm at the top of the cage doesn't mean I'm not still in the cage. We still on the goddamn cage. And some of us see that. Many of us don't. Many of us don't understand we're all still in the fucking cage. And so we're striving to get to the top of the cage as if being at the top of the cage is the same thing as being out of the fucking cage. The proximity to white supremacy is sufficient. My grace is sufficient for you. These white people have turned themselves into God. I said in my book that whiteness creates the same conditions from which we seek salvation. It posits itself salvation and then creates the conditions for which we need salvation. So we're at a time now where we're being called to see this for what it is. We use the last of Master's tools to disable Master's house. We have now proven what we have been saying, what your elders have been saying, what the leftists that you hate have been saying, what the people who are politically apathetic have been saying. You opt out of a system because you recognize the system doesn't work. But after having done all you can, you simply stand. You can't keep begging these people to let you in the motherfucking house. There's not enough positions of power. There's not enough money and billions to get out of scarcity mindset. My homegirl said, why do billionaires keep making money? On one hand, it's greed. On the other hand, it's scarcity. Greed is a product of scarcity. You get greedy when you ain't never had it. And you scared it ain't gonna come again. And you scared you're gonna lose it all. Because you live in a constant precarious state of scarcity, which is designed by this fucking system. That is the point, to have you fighting for resources. Ain't none of that shit, though, can save you from the conditions of blackness. I believe in democratic processes, but I don't believe that the United States has ever been a constitutional democracy. Not when it's built in to create you as fucking 3/5 of a goddamn human. How can that be built in equity or equality? That's why they fucking hate DEI. Diversity, equity, inclusion. You were never meant to be any of that. You were never meant to be equitable. You were never meant to be included beyond a fucking slave class. That's why you can't buy your way out of the conditions of blackness. And they keep convincing you that if you behave well enough, maybe you'll get the privilege of proximity. If you are dutiful and you do your social duty, your civic duty, you vote, you don't cause no trouble, you don't go to jail, you don't do none of this, they'll let you in the gates and you'll stop suffering. Your salvation will come. Not in that way. We got to save ourselves. And how do you save yourselves? You release the chains that keep you bound. That's real shit. We have to acknowledge that we've done all that we can, and now it's time to stand. Stand up. Fighting to preserve a system that ain't never served you for what? Fight to preserve you. Fight to save you. And when I say you, that's not just the individual self. That is community. That is collective. That is people who are all aligned for the same mission. Community does not mean we all like each other. It don't mean we all agree. It really don't. The only thing we have to agree on is the main objective of what we're doing community for. That is the only thing we need to agree on. You ain't got to like me. I ain't got to like you. Personality and interpersonal bullshit, be damned. Find a way to be courteous. Find a way to come together. But also acknowledge that we don't have to rub together in order for us to do this together. I understand that we have done all that we can to try to rehabilitate, to try to bring dignity and humanity to a system that never saw us as human. We have to constantly have our rights to humanity legislated. And you don't even get the respect of being codified. With the stroke of a pen, we are losing our humanity as defined within the system. And it is our refusal to behave as inhumane that angers them. After having done all you can stand, to be refused to be made inhuman, to refuse to take indignity and accept it as salvation is standing. To refuse to accept that this is the limitations of who God is to and for us is having done all you can and now standing. To refuse to believe that all forms of life are not valuable and precious and necessary, and that diversity is a sin. We lost the plot when it became okay to preach that empathy is a sin. It is no surprise to me then to hear the father of that lie, supremacist sociopathy, turn around and say that empathy is a sin when a called woman of God stood flat-footed at her lectern and asked that man to behave as God called and commanded him to do. It does not surprise me that people see the death of Jesus, the murder of Jesus, the volunteerism of Jesus to come as an intermediary. If you believe the story, Jesus comes to earth because Jesus is intervening on our behalf. Though, again, the only choice you get in Christianity seems to be at the beginning. They tell you to choose life, choose Jesus, choose ye this day. They tell you, they drive home for you that Jesus died for the commission of your sins. Jesus died to save you. They drive this home over and over again. They tell you how innocent Jesus was, how not guilty. Jesus sacrificed himself. Sacrifice can only come from empathy. It surprises me not then that these people do not see Jesus' death as an empathetic sacrifice and therefore see empathy as a sin, because they don't see that sacrifice as I care so much about the well-being and the salvation of others that I will give my life, having committed no sin other than coming to disrupt what was causing harm and what was causing people to engage sin? What if I told you so much of what is defined as sin, and really the thing, sin is nothing but that which separates you from God, that which makes you feel like you can't be close to God, that which makes you feel ashamed to go before the throne, that which makes you feel like you disbelieve it so fucking much you can't even believe in that God. That is sin. And so when you understand it that way, and you understand that these systems that are created by these people playing demigods because they want to be God, and they create the conditions for sin that makes people, you steal because you have a need, whether that be a need for attention or an actual real practical tangible need. You murder because you need to feel in control, because you need to feel like you control the sense of justice. You murder because you plain old evil. You do all the things in which that made us a sinful self, that God was so ready to destroy the world. Jesus understood that what needed to be changed were the systems that created the conditions that made it necessary to create or to act in ways that are sinful. Having had, Jesus really could have been like, my name Ben and I ain't in it. I ain't had shit to do with this. I'm chilling up here. I'm good. I'm a spirit. I'm fine. Well, you understand that? It makes sense then that they would see empathy as a sin, because they don't see Jesus' death as an act of empathy. They see it as a power move. I died for you. You were so wretched. You were such a wretch undone. You were so unworthy, and I died for you anyway. Me in my perfection. Me in all of my glory. Me, I'm Jesus. I died for you. They see it as a power move, not an act that says, I care about my neighbor. I care about my sibling. I care about somebody bigger than me. I care about somebody more than just myself. And I'm going to make this sacrifice. I know it's going to cost me. Only in this lived experience of this flesh. I'm Jesus. Jesus literally said, yeah, I'm going to pay this cost. But baby, I'm going to be back. I'm going to get back up in 3 days. As my sister Valerie said tonight, we do this work by faith in a Jesus who rejected a lynching. Jesus is lynched. We say that Jesus was murdered by the state because Jesus decided to do the work of liberation. Jesus was lynched. His death was humiliating on purpose. The cruelty was the point. He was lynched. And he still said, Jesus knew what was going to happen and still said, I'll see you in 3 days. So we do this work. We've come this far by faith in a Jesus who rejects a lynching. But these people operate in a Jesus who does that not out of empathetic love for others, but as a power move and a checkmate to keep you in control. You got to check the supremacy of your salvation. Whose God are you expecting liberation from? Whose God do you expect to set you free? And what system do you expect to save you? So we are at a place now where we have used all of Master's tools to dismantle Master's house. We have proven what we have already known intuitively, which is that there is no self-destruct button in Master's house. Master has to dismantle Master's house. This is why I keep saying this responsibility and onus is on white people. To fix what is broken right now, this is on them. This is the years of atonement that have been avoided generation after generation after generation after generation. If this does not stop now, in another 100 years, there will be white descendants alive going, well, I was never a neo-Nazi in 2025 and nobody alive was. To rationalize why they should not be responsible for the atonement that has not yet been taken, for the dehumanization of Black and Indigenous bodies on this land. They made a blood sacrifice, and they've always wanted to reap the benefits of the sacrifice, of the blood that they spilled, but never want to pay for the blood. They never want to pay the cost. When you do root work, when you do any kind of magical work, if you've been taught right, if you're doing work with material, particularly earthly material, you don't take material without giving an offering for what you received. You give offering. You give credit for what you are using, that because you're putting their material to work. You're using it to enrich yourself. And so if you think that you can just go and spill blood and not pay the penalty and not pay what is due, I said a couple weeks ago, they will always choose Barabbas. I actually said this more than a couple weeks ago, but I restated it a couple weeks ago. They will always choose Barabbas. Give us Barabbas and let his blood be upon our children's head. They always choose Barabbas, which means it always continues to push the atonement down on their children's children, and nobody takes accountability. Nobody says we chose Barabbas when we should have chose Jesus. We were angry about the perceived loss of power and chose evil as a result. There will be If you do not fix this now, there will be, in 100 years, a white person. They're going to be telling your descendants, well, nobody alive voted for Donald Trump. I'm not saying I should have to pay for the sins of failure to make amends. Because they keep choosing Barabbas. And they keep choosing to pass along atonement. So this is white people's issue to fix at this point. Somebody's got to take and pay the price. And that price does not necessarily have to be death. It has to be an ego death. It has to be a death of supremacy. You're going to have to let go of that false power that you have created. But whether you do or not, black folks and indigenous folks and all the rest of us, and when I say white, I mean politically participating in the idea of white supremacy. I'm watching the same news y'all watch. You know, I'm seeing it in real time. And he is exactly who he said he was going to be. And all of these things exist. But there were some white-skinned folks who understood the necessity and their responsibility to our liberation. They took accountability. They stopped passing down the blood of Barabbas, at least in some ways. So we got to develop a new system. We've done all that we can. Now it's time to stand. What does it look like to stand? To get off our knees and stop pleading and begging? What does it look like to not wait for emancipation, but to take our liberation? What does that mean? What does it mean to redefine wealth? What does it mean to redefine community? What does it mean to begin to trust one another again? That we can share resources without fear that somebody gonna run off with the church's money. The fear and hesitancy we have towards doing the community cooperative economics is real, because people are still swimming and leading in the residue of their baptism, deep water baptism, okay, full immersion baptism, and supremacy. In capitalism, I said earlier, capitalism breeds the behaviors that we know and engage in call as sin. It breeds greed. It breeds gluttony. It breeds selfishness. It breeds all the things that makes cooperative economics a very terrifying investment. I get it. I understand all the hesitation around cooperative economics. But also know that's our way forward. Community is the way forward. The thing they can never manufacture more of is land. Land is the great equalizer. Black people who are still living through the trauma of enslavement, which then also includes the continent. When we don't have an ethno state, when we don't own the land, we can't own our autonomy. When we don't own the true means of production, which is always, the land is always the foundation of production. The land produces fruit. The land produces home. The land sustains food. The land provides the sustenance. There is nothing that we engage that does not first start with the land. So the goal is always to keep us from owning the land. That means most of us do not have the monetary resources or wealth to own it, and nor do we want to make the human sacrifice of blood to own it. Go in and possess the land. How much of the scripture in its details is all about people taking possession of land? Go in and possess the land. How much of wealth this is the promised land. That's literally how we describe what it is to get to a space of full salvation, relief from captivity. And every time it became the fruition of wealth, it was in the possession of land. If you believe the scriptures, that's all I'm saying. I will use your text to teach back to you. So if you believe in the scriptures, I just want you to consider that every time the wealth came, it was in the land. It ain't a single point of wealth that did not come in and under in the scripture about the possession of land. This earth is 4.5 billion years old, and I believe the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, which means the land that is existing now has always been the land that existed and ain't no more being made. And the possession of land is where the wealth is. So we've got to really rethink, how do we define wealth? How do we redefine currency? How do we redefine what it means to make somebody feel fully valued and made whole by the cost of their labor? The time, the effort, the energy, the resources. I mean, well before our time under capitalism. Outside and beyond in other systems and structures that are not fucking capitalism, we took care of one another. And we trusted the other person to make us whole. Because there was no conditioned and socialized scarcity. The money's made up. They're going to make more of that shit. So how do we redefine currency? How do we make sure that we are willing to make each other whole? We have to give up this shit that we know. We keep sticking with the devil we know because we keep going, it's better than the devil I don't know. Is it? I ain't never here to tell you what to think. I always just want you to think, because it's the last thing they can't take from you. As a man thinketh, so is he. That's where your power is. That's why they control your thoughts and your minds. As a man thinketh, so is he. If I'm thinking freedom, I'm thinking liberation, then that's what I am. And that's what I'm going to fight to make sure all of us get to experience. Because they profit from your death. Fascism works its control through death. Death of institutions, death of decorum, death of traditions, death of relationships, death of families, death of community. The social control works by death. So they actually do want you to die because it keeps you in a state of control. But I don't believe we can die here. After having done all that we can, we stand. You don't get to die here. We didn't come this far by faith in a Jesus who rejects lynching. Again, credit to Sister Committee Chair Valerie Boyer for that. You don't come this far by faith in the Jesus who rejects the lynching to die here. You can't kill what is already eternal. The reason I'm not worried, and I really will close by saying this, the reason I'm not worried about life after death is because I believe in my heart that the work that I do in answering my calling and the work that my soul must have and doing work to make life more fair and just for somebody else, that even when I die, that will live on and that will live eternal. So I'm not worried about if there's a heaven. I'm not worried about if there's a hell. If there's nothing afterwards. I spent my time here trying to leave this world and society and community better than I found it. And that's justice. That's work that don't need a reward for me. But if there is no streets paved with gold and wealth untold, this capitalist dream of heaven, if that don't exist, I'm okay. But I do believe there's a heaven, and I believe it's much more than winning capitalism and trying to win a system that was rigged to begin with. The house always wins, and you can't use master's tools to dismantle master's house. Y'all be well. I love you. Good night.